Video game adaptations don't always work well, and we've seen a pretty terrible track record of video game to movie adaptations. And Return to Silent Hill, unfortunately, does not hit the mark. It really doesn't do much to advance Silent Hill 2, and it overall is just not a good film. And in this video, I'm going to go over some of the things that the movie did okay, and some of the things that they really messed up. Now, I want to set the expectation. There's going to be some spoilers. I'm going to talk about some of the story elements and some of the different scenes in the film. So if you are really excited to see this film and don't want any of it spoiled, you may want to skip this video or skip parts of this video. But I'm going to kind of break down what they did differently from Silent Hill 2, what they kind of kept the same, and ultimately why what they changed or didn't change just didn't work overall. So let's take a look. So to start, I think out of the gate, one of the things that I knew this was kind of coming, I saw the trailers, but one of the things that kind of felt like it just didn't fit from the very beginning was this sort of approach to make James's character seem a lot cooler. And I know that might seem trivial, but coming off of Silent Hill 2 remake, you kind of get this sense that James is an everyman, but he's also in some ways seems kind of like a disenfranchised person, which is what makes his character work so well for just the Silent Hill 2 world and narrative. And the way this film starts, we get James as this cool guy in his Ford Mustang, and he's also this silent painter, and he's just overall just trying to, in my opinion, kind of fit something that doesn't work for the James Sunderland character. And so I was kind of like, I'm going to try to go in with an open mind. I'm going to try to ignore all the negative noise that I've heard about this film. But even the way he meets Mary at the beginning, he ends up running into some of her luggage as she's waiting for a bus, and this cool almost spin scene. It's just, in my opinion, stupid. I thought it was a stupid way that he met Mary, and it just didn't feel like an interaction that made much sense to me. And I guess I get the approach that was being taken here, and I kind of appreciate that approach. It just was executed so badly. And what I mean is, in Silent Hill 2, the games, you get a bit of backstory about how James met Mary, and you get a bit of backstory about them together, but it's very minuscule, right? And so I guess I thought, at very least, one of the cool things the film could do is really flesh out that aspect of the relationship, and that is something that reoccurs throughout the film. You kind of learn more about James and Mary together, and kind of see them out doing things, and their romance blossoming. And so I thought that aspect wasn't a terrible approach. I just don't think it was executed well. And part of the reason it was not executed well is because they add a whole new narrative to Mary that was non-existent in the Silent Hill 2 games. And so what I mean is, Mary now, and I think this is their way of trying to tie this to the first film, I'm not sure, but Mary is now a victim, I guess you can say, of a cult. She's a victim, and they don't necessarily state if this is the standard Silent Hill cult or some new cult. I'm not sure. But Mary is a victim of a cult, and she kind of hints to James how he might not be able to accept her based off of who she really is, and it turns out that who she really is this key element or something to this cult, and they perform really bizarre, rituals covering her in blood and all this other weird shit. And I thought this aspect honestly was very cheesy. I thought this was trying to grab for something that it shouldn't have. I think the reason Silent Hill 2 worked so well as a game was that it was very self-contained. You can give someone Silent Hill 2 without them having played the other Silent Hill games, and they can really get into it. But trying to just throw this cult element in just seemed really silly to me. I thought it was kind of cheesy. Even the actors they had playing some of the cult members who you do stumble into seemed like worse than B-movie grade actors. They just were not great. It made this portion feel even cheesier than it should have. The other thing that this is just kind of a general thing that you'll kind of see about the movie if you do decide to go and see it after watching this or the other 1,000 negative reviews on it, is that the way each of these characters are introduced, not just Mary, it just seems like in the post-editing, they're like, oh yeah, we gotta add this character, and then they do it. And I just, something about that felt so poorly integrated. And I would say the worst example of this is we have Eddie, who pops up for, I'm gonna guess, if my memory's serving correctly, he has like 3 minutes of screen time, and he does not feel like Eddie. He's not, in my opinion, just even a good Eddie, I guess. And I'm not sure what benefit he added to progressing the story or even any of this at all. I'm not even sure why they included him in this. He gets met the exact same way that James has always met Eddie from both Silent Hill 2 and the remake. You find him puking in a bathroom, but none of the surrounding context from those games is in here. And it seems like they've now adapted this idea that Silent Hill 2's town really is this weird barren wasteland as a result of some disease that's killed everybody off. And Eddie's just there because he gets left alone. And he makes a comment on this, even though James is now intruding on his space. I'm not sure. But adding Eddie in here just made absolutely no sense. And it felt like this was some sort of scene in the post-edit, they're like, oh yeah, we should probably go back and film a scene and include Eddie because fans are going to want him there. I want to highlight, I'm not against taking creative liberties, and I get the incredibly hard challenge of trying to please Silent Hill 2 fans, but also do your own thing. And I think the best example we saw of this was Bloober Team's Silent Hill 2 remake. They, in my opinion, accomplished the impossible. They took the existing Silent Hill 2, made it feel like Silent Hill 2, but built upon it and fleshed upon a lot of elements in really tasteful and good ways. Return to Silent Hill, it seems like it's trying to do that. Even in the context of what I'm talking about with Eddie, it's trying to do that, but it completely falls flat in almost every regard. And one of the worst parts to this that I think really did not sit well, that I really disliked as well, and it may sound like a minor thing. I'm gonna backpedal a bit from this Eddie scene, but early on into the movie, when James is getting into the Silent Hill, and he's just met Angela as well, which again felt like it was just kind of thrown in there, and just the scene just kind of pops up, but that's neither here nor there at this point. He ends up. You have the famous, radio scene that you kind of always have in Silent Hills, especially Silent Hill 2 and the remake. And he goes to explore, like classical music playing, and he finds this radio, and he finds this, like what looks like, an entity on the ground. But turns out, upon closer inspection, it's a homeless guy. My problem with this is it's pretty much implied from this point on that these monsters are probably real, which goes against kind of the whole aspect of Silent Hill as a whole. Or Silent Hill 2 as a whole. To me, the unique thing about that game, the remake, is this is James's own unique personal horror. And the reason I'm saying that this is kind of implied here is James ends up leaving this alleyway where this homeless guy is, and this homeless guy talks about basically alluding to the darkness and everything else, and then you see this homeless guy see one of the lying figures in the distance, and it kills him. It sounds trivial, but this just, to me, it basically out of the gate now shows that these monsters are probably real. At least that was the implication. And this isn't just something that is personal to James. And you see this even fleshed out with Eddie's character and some of the other characters there. Now, as the movie progresses, there's this weird, very poorly implemented implication that this is just all in James's mind. The reason I dislike that is this is almost like it was all a dream type of plot twist sort of approach to James Sunderland, which is just cheesy in its own right. But you get snippets of this because James now, you'll learn, has a psychiatrist that he's dealing with to help him navigate the grief of his death over Mary. And it just, in my opinion, does not work. And I don't know if that's because the director was a fan of Shattered Memories and wanted to just throw this in here too to make it seem cool. But it doesn't work like it kind of half did in Shattered Memories. It just doesn't work. Anyways, progress through the film. which, by the way, the editing is very weird in this film. It feels like there is a cohesive narrative, but I'll put it like this, if you weren't paying attention to this film 100% of the time, and you kind of like looked away for a bit and then looked back, you would feel very lost very quick. And what I mean is, it feels like James is at one point in, you know, the barren, desolate, normal Silent Hill, and then all of a sudden in the other world, and then all of a sudden in a building, and then all of a sudden running from nurses. It just seems almost more like a big long trailer in some ways than it does a proper film. But it is cohesive. It's just, I thought at some cases it felt almost a little confusing the way they juggled up the different areas and environments. Now, I am saying a lot of stuff that that's implying this movie sucks, which it does. There are some redeeming qualities, and I will highlight what those few redeeming qualities are. Some of the monster designs I thought were great. I thought the nurses looked cool. I thought even the Pyramid Head, the way they had him designed, I thought he looked cool. There were some cool aspects here. The second, though, that this movie would start relying on CGI, it felt really bad. Okay? So, I think to me what I really liked about the very first Silent Hill film was, yes, there was some CGI and you could tell where it was, but ultimately they went to great lengths to really make these monsters practical, not CGI, and that was something that really made that film stand out, and it, even to this day, it still really holds up in a lot of ways. Whereas in this film, they kind of ditched the mannequins entirely, and they end up introducing, I don't even know what you want to call it. I've heard some people refer to it as like this weird moth lady or something, and they introduced this and immediately just looks very cheesy, and it doesn't really work. And even further to that, Mary as a monster, which you see throughout the film in various different stages, I thought looked incredibly cheesy. It looked like a weird like rip-off of Vecna from Stranger Things. I thought it looked corny. I just thought it didn't work. And it sucked because you could tell some of these monsters, like the nurses, who don't really get much screen time in this, and Pyramid Head, like, it seems like great care went into using practical effects to make them look good. But then you get these other monster designs that just don't really look scary, but look kind of goofy. And it's unfortunate because it seems like this movie's battling with itself, really. It seems like there's a lot of aspects to it where I'm like, okay, this could be cool. Like the set design for the most part I thought looked good. I thought some of the areas they used and everything looked Silent Hill 2 to me, and it had part of that atmosphere. But then when you see the bad cutting and the way that it just kind of shifts from area to area, and then you see the way that the monster designs looked interspersed into that, it really just takes you out of it. And it seems like maybe it was budget constraints. That's probably part of what this was. But it just really felt like the movie was working against itself. But anyways, so you progress through the film, and about 45, 50 minutes or so in, James encounters Maria, who's for anyone who's played Silent Hill 2, you should know who that is. And the actress who plays Maria, and she also obviously plays Mary, and I'm going to spoil it right now, she also plays Angela. She does a good job of switching between these different characters. But the problem is that I don't really necessarily think it's her problem. It's the way the script was formatted. I understand Silent Hill 2 had almost this weird robotic speech in some cases, but it worked for what that was, and it made sense, I guess, based off of the circumstance, and it kind of added to this realism. I don't know if that's what the director was going for here, but their dialogue just feels weird. It just doesn't feel good, and maybe I'm expecting too much from a movie adaptation. But the dialogue between James and Maria, it feels, I guess the best way to put it is forced. And then I also want to highlight Maria's character as a whole. I mentioned this in a previous video regarding this film. She just looks like she doesn't belong in this film. And one of the people who commented on that video mentioned it's her wig, and I don't disagree. I think that's exactly what it is. The wig looks fake. And so it makes her character look like she does not belong in here at all. She doesn't feel like she should be a part of this, if that makes sense, with this weird decrepit world. And I get the Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 2 remake kind of did the same thing, but they did enough to ground her that it didn't feel like somebody just popping in that just shouldn't be there. And that's, that portion with Maria, just, that didn't feel good. And then even the way they tried to flesh her out, like in Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 2 Remake, you felt like you were developing a relationship with Maria. But the way this film was cut and the way you see her introduced and then killed off, it felt like, again, they just threw her in there for fanfare. It didn't feel like she really added much to the film. As the movie progresses, you end up learning, and this is like the big plot twist reveal, which, and I just want to highlight, if this plot twist was executed correctly, this could have actually been a super cool plot twist. But the plot twist turns out that as the movie progresses, and you do see Laura in this, but again, I'm not going too deep into it because for some reason, Laura looks like a zombie with this weird zombie baby that also makes noise. And it had some cool symbolism that for the plot twist would make sense. But it turns out that Laura, Angela, and Maria were actually all aspects of Mary's personality in her past. And then to try to like highlight this plot twist, they end up showing a gravestone of Mary, and who's no longer Mary Shepherd, as I recall, was the last name in the games. It's Mary Crane for some reason, but it shows her full name, so it's Mary Angela Laura Crane. My opinion is this is just it's a stupid way to execute this plot twist, and then it's like very on the nose that this is, of course, she was all three of these people at some point, and the horrors of the cult caused her to fracture or something, and James is now getting to experience her in these ways. The plot twist itself, and I'll put it like this, because Angela's character is a very, very sad character in Silent Hill 2 and the remake. And, I actually thought that aspect would kind of be cool for what they were going for. But because the cult was so poorly executed, and because everything else was so poorly executed, it unfortunately just felt cheesy. So what I'm trying to get at is it was a good idea and concept, because you have this tragic Angela character, which would tie into the tragedy of having this little girl, Laura, with this baby who I'm wagering is implying that this was like a baby who didn't make it due to the sexual assault that she unfortunately would have faced. And tying those three together, and then Maria's kind of like this overtly sexualized character who that's how she projects herself to everybody as a result of her trauma. I thought that was actually kind of an intelligent, cool way to tie that, that lore together for what the purpose of this film was. But because the cult was so poorly executed, and really, in my opinion, from the start, I'm not sure it should have even been a part of that, it kind of nullifies this twist, if that makes sense. But you have it, and it's not, when I say it's on the nose, it's pretty direct, but it's also, it feels flat, like most of everything in this film, in my opinion. And I think the bigger issue is because of the way the film cuts everything, and it seems like you're getting pieces of this film kind of stitched together in this weird trailer format. Once James actually goes and confronts Mary, you don't get like the big boss battle like you had in the games or anything. You get a kind of cool looking visual sequence, I guess, but then you get the weird Vecna Mary again that pops up, and you kind of see James, and which the reason he killed her, I guess I get why, but it turns out Mary was only James's girlfriend anyways. You kind of hear that splattered or peppered through the movie. But Maria, or Mary, I keep getting the two confused, but Mary, it turns out, begged James to kind of end her life, I guess, even though they were broken up. But now she's sick from, I assume, being given some drug from the cult too much. Now she's left to die and the cult's nowhere to be found or something. But that's what's happening, and she kind of begs James to kill her. To me, this is it. I think like in Silent Hill 2 and the remake, what works so well about James killing Mary was you could tell that this was a man who was in love with Mary, but he came to hate her due to her being sick. And this was something that was out of her control, it's out of his control. So it's, the personal tragedy of this that led to his personal hell, it felt like there was some major impact when you come to the conclusion of this is what's going on. And this film, turns out James had already broken up with her at some point, and now he's just kind of showing up to do the deed. Like, it feels so flat. So even the ending, when he kind of confronts the demon Vecna Mary or whatever in her floating bed, which, by the way, the CGI here on some parts of this look really bad, but some parts look kind of cool. Really weird scene. It feels just not good. And you see James kind of just, at this point, come to terms with what he did, and that's it. And then the movie wraps up with James, I guess, implying that this was all some weird daydream in James's head, and of him coming to terms with his grief. And then him deciding to remember his initial moments with Mary a little differently, and hoping that things could be different. Ultimately, this movie was a mess. Like I said earlier, it felt like this film was fighting with itself to try to do some things that could have been good, but just fell flat. A lot of the story elements that they added in were badly executed, and ultimately just, in my opinion, didn't really work for what they were going for. I think they're... How do I say this? I know I keep beating up on the cult component, but I think the way it was integrated just felt so forced, like a lot of things in this film. Even the elements with Eddie, especially, and to a further degree Maria, like, they just felt like they were kind of just thrown in there for fanfare, and not because they actually served any purpose to the story. I get you can take the psychological components. There's going to be an argument made for why Maria was this projection on James and who he wanted Mary to be. You could say all that shit, but the way it was done in this film, it was just kind of like, she's there, then she's gone. The part with Eddie was the most bizarre. Like, I'm not even sure why they even included him if he was such a minor, useless character to this film. None of the aspects to Eddie really made sense. I didn't really go too deep into Angela because they did such a piss poor job of really fleshing her out. Again, they made kind of her like Laura. They made Angela look like a zombie for some reason, or zombified. Like, she had this like I don't even know. And maybe that's because they're implying she's been in this weird, dusty, dirty place. I don't know, but she just, her scenes I almost forgot were even there until I started talking about it in this, because they were very minor impact, but I would say they were a little bit more impactful than Eddie's. But again, that plot twist that I just mentioned could have been a bit more impactful had they fleshed out Angela more. Had they properly fleshed out these characters better. Had they even done something better with Maria to really tie that all together. But it just felt like they were grasping at straws. And then the hilarious, like, James looking at this gravestone with all the names, all of a sudden coming to terms with, oh my God, this is what's going on. Just stupid. And to a greater degree, look, the actors tried their best in this film, but I'm not even sure I blame the actors. I think it's the bad, the bad script and the bad elements that they've tried to force into this and get these actors to dance around with, that really unfortunately worked against them as a whole. Because again, like, James Irvine, I think is the guy, part of I don't have the stuff up in front of me, who plays James in this film. Like, he does a fine job, but there's also so many scenes where he's freaking out and it's almost kind of like comical, that it looks over the top. And there's some scenes where you're like, okay, this guy could be James, he's doing a good job. And then there's just weird little things that they've added to it for his character that just seem stupid. Like, part of the reason he crashed into Mary's luggage was because he was trying to smoke some weed, which I thought was dumb. And again, like, there were so many aspects, so many elements they could have taken with James for this film that they could have done such a cool job with, that they completely dropped the ball on. I liked the implication that James was this alcoholic and all this other shit in the Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 2 remake. It was only kind of alluded to. The Silent Hill 2 remake kind of hits it a bit more directly when you see him with Maria in the Heaven's Night bar. And she's trying to get him to drink with her. And then he kind of, like, you know, seems like he's twitching his hands a bit and pushes the drink away. They could have done something a lot cooler with that. And they do show, like, one scene where he's drunk, but it doesn't really go beyond that. I would have even preferred if they'd taken the element of him being an alcoholic, kind of letting him stumble into Silent Hill 2 and face his horror. I'm not a director. I'm just saying, like, a different approach than him going back to Silent Hill and then Apparently, this is just all in his mind from his discussions with his psychiatrist. I don't know. It's kind of confusing there. That whole approach just seems stupid. It's almost like every single setup that this movie could have messed up, they've done. And the game, like the film, has some cool visuals, I guess, but again, a lot of them are taken away by some of the bad CGI. I know I'm starting to ramble on about this, but ultimately, I would say this is a step up from Revelation. Like, you don't get this. This seems like a fan film. I just want to point that out. I thought Revelation seemed like a fan film. So does this. But I'd say this is like a step up. This is the B+ fan film versus the D- fan film. Okay, but when I'm saying a B+ fan film, it's still not great, and it's missing a lot of ingredients to make it a good film, generally. And part of the reason that comes down to is the weird editing, the weird choppiness of different scenes where he kind of just is in that other world and then not in the other world that just don't really work well. Some of the weird scenarios that these actors are put into that results in some pretty awkward acting, awkward choices for different characters looking zombified, which I thought was weird, and liberties with the story that should not have been taken at all. And again, I understand this is a hard game to adapt to a film, but things that just seemed almost bizarre in terms of their plot choice. The film ultimately, it's not great. It's a marginal step up over Revelations, if that's saying much. And ultimately, if you're a Silent Hill fan, you're probably going to be disappointed with this, especially if you're a fan of the first film. This is not what I was expecting. I guess I was expecting some sort of tasteful version of Silent Hill 2, kind of like how that first film dealt with the original Silent Hill. Yes, it took its own liberties with the story and added some things that I argue aren't great, but it was a good film overall, and there was great pacing and story building and character development. This film does not do much of that. I felt like you got flashes of these characters. You never really got them fleshed out. James and Mary were probably the most fleshed out, but even that was just not good. And so if you're looking at this to be like that companion piece to that film, unfortunately, we did not get that at all. And this is a movie that really feels tone deaf and fell flat in the end.